Hey YouTube! I'm going to be doing some craft projects that are involving resin, and I just wanted to document my process. I really want to use this brand. This is Easycast Clear Casting Epoxy Resin. This is really cheap for a resin. It's widely available. It's a 1-to-1 mix ratio by volume, so this is a great product to use. However, it is perfectly clear, which might be useful, maybe, maybe not. I would like something that is colored. And you can buy pigments and stuff for this, but they're kind of expensive, so I was looking around my room at things I could add, and I'm gonna mix them in and see what happens. So the first project I have, I need something to be black, so I'm gonna start with good old black acrylic paint, which is sometimes recommended. This is a really cheap artist acrylic, so that may or may not work very well. I have no idea. Another thing that's recommended a lot are pastels, and I'm actually going to try using compressed charcoal, which is similar to pastels, but it's a lot harder, and I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but I can turn it into dust, so that will do. And then I have black India ink. This normally goes in my drafting pens, but we'll see how something that's completely liquid reacts with the resin. So those are going to be what I use to turn it black. As far as color goes, we of course have our tried and true pastels. These are artist pastels, so they're very highly pigmented. I also want to experiment with stuff being opaque, so I'm going to try using white paint. And this is an artist grade white paint, so it's a lot higher pigmented, smoother and stuff versus this cheaper brand. So it'll be interesting to compare how these two react. And then finally, the only colored ink I have is for my Copic markers, and this probably isn't really cost effective unless you already own the markers, but it is certainly a very different type of ink than the India ink, so it will be interesting to compare and contrast those two. So those are the 6 things I'm going to add. And I actually did this just a little bit earlier. So here it is initially. These are still very wet. It's in this plastic container because even though the resin says it's low odor, it stinks. So I don't want to smell plastic fumes, and they're not good to breathe. So I'm going to leave this in here for another 2 days until it's hard cured, and we'll pull them out and look at them more then. Alright, it has been a few days and the resin has cured, so I'm going to go over our results. First up, we have the black acrylic paint, and this worked out to be a really nice, completely opaque, very, very black piece of resin. However, when I was mixing this, I accidentally dropped like a pea-sized blob of paint into this very tiny volume of resin, and I would not normally add that much paint at all. And when I was mixing it, it became very, very thick, like tar, and I couldn't even pour it out of the cup. I just scrape it out and into the mold, hence these 2 little flag thingies. So, oops. It made the and if I had been trying to cast something with a lot of detail, I don't think this would have worked at all. So, potentially mixed results on that one, but as far as the color and consistency of the cured resin goes, very nice. Next we have the charcoal, and this cured just fine, mixed just fine, but it did not stay mixed. I don't know if this will focus. You can see it. Yeah, you can see the particles of charcoal just kind of sink to the bottom of the casting, and it actually made kind of a neat stippled effect, but as far as making a solid color, compressed charcoal did not work at all, so that wasn't successful. And the final black thing we had was the ink, and this mixed in really easily, and it stayed mixed in, and it made a very, very nice, rich, solid black. It has just a hint of translucency, but in general, the drawing ink seemed to be a really good way to color the resin, and it cured just fine. So, those are the black resins. Next we have the color stuff. The Copic ink worked out extremely well. It's this beautiful, translucent, rich color, and I think it was very successful. The only problem is that it took like 5 or 6 drops of ink for this relatively small volume of resin, so I don't think it's a very economic way to dye it. However, I did use a light ink So I tried later with a much more saturated one, and it also came out really beautifully, but just a little bit more ink than I'm comfortable using. So I would try color drawing inks before I would try the Copic inks, but here's that. Next is the Pastel, and while this worked better than the compressed charcoal, it still suffered from some of the same problems. This will focus, there we go. You can see little particles and how they've gathered towards the bottom. Not nearly as bad, but if I was to do this again, I would spend more time scraping the Pastel into dust to make sure that it was very fine, or I might start with, they actually sell powdered pastels, so I might just go straight to that. And it has a semi-translucent, a little bit more opaque than the inks, so, but I wouldn't consider that one as successful for this particular round. And then finally, we had the artist grade white acrylic paint, and when it was first cured it looked really nice, but you can see just comparing to this white paper, it's already turning off white. The paint itself, I can get the lid off, is a really bright pure white, whereas this is already yellowed. And I know that all resins pretty much will go yellow, and the cheaper ones yellow faster, but if I had been looking for a pure white, this wouldn't have been acceptable. It also did not cure right at all. Like, this is really, really, really soft. So the white paint didn't work at all, and I don't know if it's just that particular formula. It could also be that I didn't mix it this last batch quite right, because this is the last one I got to and I just wanted to be done. But this was a complete failure. So in summary, if we're going to rank these in terms of success, I would put the drawing ink up at top, closely followed by the Copic marker ink. This is second because it took so much of it, and that could get very expensive very fast. Third, we have the black acrylic paint, or the craft grade acrylic paint, which would have done better if it hadn't changed the consistency of the resin so much while I was pouring it. Underneath that, the Pastel, which could do better maybe with more careful application. The compressed charcoal, and then finally the artist grade white acrylic paint. So, hopefully this was useful to somebody, and happy resin casting!